therapy and patient-related outcomes. We are all of us familiar with EGFR mutation, ALK fusions, ROS1 mutation, but those that have come into play in the last few years are RET mutation, BRAF, V600E. I know the next talk is going to be about that, NTRK fusions, MET exon 14 skipping mutations, high-level MET amplification, and those that are coming more and more into play, PD-L1, IHC, and tumor mutational burden. But all of us, I think, are very, very closely linked to our pathologist, and we are only as good as our pathologist, I think. So in lung cancer, more than any other cancer, tissue has always been an issue, right? From sample collection, processing, getting the staining, getting the molecular testing done. Every step is critical, and if there is a misstep along the way, that compromises the integrity of our final report and what we will tell the patient regarding their treatment. However, there is now a paradox between the need to obtain enough samples for multiple analysis and the development of minimally invasive or non-invasive techniques, resulting in smaller tissue samples with minimal amounts of DNA. While the gold standard always will remain, I believe, tumor tissue, there are others that have become more important now, such as cell blocks made from the pleural fluid, and in the last few years, again, circulating tumor cells and cell-free DNA. Each of these samples have their advantages and disadvantages, but again, talking about those that are becoming more important as time goes by are the blood-based biomarker analysis, especially circulating tumor cells and cell-free DNA. Circulating tumor cells are the cells that we obtain from primary or metastatic tumor that is shed into the bloodstream. Cell-free or DNA or ctDNA is cell-free DNA that is in the blood that comes from the dead tumor cells. And with improvements in detection and isolation, this DNA from CTC or cell-free DNA has become a very important biomarker. The advantages of this is that it's faster, it's easier, patient is compliant, it's less invasive, and it can be repeated at multiple time points when you're treating your patient, and it facilitates decision making. For example, getting T790M mutation now can be done on your liquid biopsy. The disadvantages, of course, remain that there is a high false negative rate, and sometimes we can pick up variants that are not related to the tumor, such as the clonal heterogeneity of indeterminate significance, and we have to know at the outset what is the role of this variant that we are picking up. The most important point is that if we don't get an answer in the liquid biopsy, you have to go back and do the tissue biopsy. Again, talking about how important these are becoming, in the last 1 year, FDA has approved 3 liquid biopsies from Foundation One, from Garden 360, and from OncoMind target tests. I am not that familiar with the ones that we are now doing in India, but perhaps Dr. Parekh or the other speakers can tell us a little bit more about the accreditation and the validity of these tests. So, depending on the type of genetic alteration that we see in the cancer, such as amplification, overexpression, point mutation, or gene rearrangement, we have to decide what is the test that we want to order. Going into EGFR mutations, the one that we most commonly pick up, we know that exon 19 deletion, exon 21, and L858R point mutation, and some exon 19 insertions are indicative of the response to EGFR therapy. Exon 20 insertions, except for one, will tell us about resistance. We used to be getting this through real-time PCR, but now more and more, some of us are getting it through NGS. The gene rearrangements we would pick up from FISH break-apart probe or IHC, but again, certain NGS can pick these gene rearrangements up too. Same for BRAF point mutations. We're getting real-time PCR, Sanger sequencing with enrichment, but now NGS are getting into getting more important. So as you can see, in almost all of the mutations, apart from the real-time PCR and FISH, NGS has really come into its own. The important point whenever we are ordering for these biomarkers is that we use a laboratory that is properly accredited. We understand the methodology that we are utilizing and the limitation of that methodology. For example, in gene rearrangement, sometimes the NGS will not pick it up and we have to go back and do instead of a DNA-based NGS, we have to do an RNA-based NGS. We have to understand the spectrum of alterations that are tested or not tested by a specific assay. We need to know that the sample that we are sending in is accepted by the laboratory, and whether the sample that we send through a pathology review and, for example, in Sanger sequencing, gets an enrichment process. I'll not go into the details of each biomarker testing, but FISH is the one, as we talked about, is more common for the gene rearrangements such as ALK and ROS, IHC for PD-L1, and again ALK, RT-PCR or PCR for the point mutations, and now more and more for broad molecular profiling, we are using NGS. A few points about NGS. This is modern high throughput DNA sequencing, which has a number of advantages over the standard biomarker testing. The one most common being that because it allows for parallel testing of all the biomarkers of interest. The problem with NGS is, I believe, that not all of the NGS platforms are, properly proper validation has undergone, and that I think will be the problem again for the indigent companies in India that are using that have come up with their own NGS platforms. We have to make the most of the tissue sample that we receive, and right at the outset in lung cancer, we know that this patient will undergo molecular profiling. So we need to talk to our pathologists and make sure that they conserve the samples. Instead of doing serial sectioning, they're doing concurrent sectioning so that we reduce the tissue wastage. Today, without getting our molecular profiling done for our lung cancer patient, most of us will not start therapy. And this is reflected also, of course, in the NCCN guidelines and the ESMO guidelines, which ask, regardless of whether, if it is adenocarcinoma, of course, we will get EGFR, ALK, ROS, BRAF, MET exon 14, RET testing, and the PD-L1. For squamous cell carcinoma, if the tissue is smaller or we think the patient is a non-smoker, we will still have them undergo the EGFR and ALK testing. And of course, PD-L1 has to be done, whether it is adenocarcinoma or squamous cell carcinoma. So, despite all of us understanding and recognizing the fact that biomarker analysis is integral to the management of advanced non-small cell lung cancer, there are various barriers to biomarker testing. Sometimes the tissue is just unavailable. Sometimes we don't know if the particular mutation we are picking up is a driver of tumor growth. Sometimes we do pick up a mutation, but commercially available drug therapy is not there. It's only available in clinical trials. Sometimes there is lack of access and reimbursement, not just for testing, but for the reimbursement of the targeted drugs. So I think that has been a challenge for us, all of us in India, more than probably the oncologists treating these patients abroad. But looking at the latest version of NCCN guidelines, we can see there is a plethora of drug therapy available depending on what mutation or what biomarker we are looking at. And especially, like I said, in the last year or so, there have been newer drugs available for MET exon 14 skipping mutation, NTRK gene fusions, and RET rearrangements. And we will, of course, hear more about BRAF V600E. I did a quick Google search looking at, just with biomarkers in lung cancer, and of all the papers that I came up, most of them were talking about the biomarkers and response to immune checkpoint inhibitors. But one paper that I found that was really interesting was looking at the real world rate of biomarker testing. And this is coming from the US, where despite, they're having all the resources available, even today, only 70% of patients with non-small cell lung cancer were able to undergo biomarker testing. So I think that really sums up whatever is the issue with biomarker analysis for non-small cell lung cancer. I don't know what is the number for India, but I would be interested in finding out. So for concluding, I'd just like to say that biomarker-based therapy or personalized therapy is here to stay. The immediate and quality tissue sample processing is critical to ensure that your sample is well preserved for all the analysis that we want to undergo, and the analysis take place at an accredited lab with a validated testing platform. There are various tests that exist: FISH, IHC, PCR, NGS. The advantage of NGS is that it will allow us to test for all the biomarkers at the get-go, and I believe more and more of us are having our patients undergo NGS so that all of the answers are there right at the beginning of treatment planning. All the current treatment guidelines do recommend biomarker testing for picking up an actionable mutation and suggest broader molecular testing to identify additional actionable mutations that might allow for participation in a clinical trial. However, the tragedy is, despite all these guidelines, not all patients are able to undergo biomarker testing, and a number of barriers exist, which we will have to kind of know how we can overcome, especially for our patients in India. And with that, I'd like to really thank all of you for very patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful talk. Before moving to our next session, I will just play a short video. Our next speaker is Dr. Ullas Batra, medical oncologist from New Delhi. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and it's nice to be here. Now I'll ask the most important questions in this pandemic. That is, when are we going to get the vaccine? So, Dr. Parekh, sir, are we going to get the vaccine soon?
I'm sure we are going to get the vaccine. The question is how soon? And
Yeah,
hopefully in the first half of 2021 we should have it.
Oh wow! I mean, that's optimistic, sir. I mean, that's very optimistic.
WHO has just released a video that says that the frontliners, people who like doctors and healthcare professionals, will be the priority for getting the first dose of the vaccine, which will be in the first half of 2021.
Okay.
There are 8
in India
candidates.
also?
There are 8 candidates in advanced stage of the clinical trials, and 3 of them early report is saying that it is promising. So I'm hopeful that India will also be it.
So I mean, in addition to the BRAF mutation, Burette mutant, NSCLC, and dabrafenib, trametinib, I think even Novartis will agree that this is the much better news that Dr. Parekh has given us rather than talking about BRAF mutant. If it was not a Novartis symposium, I would have asked Dr. Parekh to speak more about it. But since I have been given a job, I'll speak about personalized therapies to further improve survival in BRAF mutant non-small cell lung cancer. So when I actually first, read this thing, and to be honest, I have done a presentation on this before. So I thought I'll just get up and present it right now. And I read the topic around 10 minutes earlier. And I said personalized therapy in BRAF mutated non-small cell lung cancer. I mean, and you are like, and you want to further improve survival. So, I mean, further, really? I mean, where was the survival actually before? So this was the conversation that I had. So I have divided my talk into 3 topics. One is we introduce BRAF. That does the current evidence meet the unmet need? So what exactly is BRAF? So we all, I mean, this is the graph, this is the chart, which helped us to pass our exam in DM Medical Oncology. Anybody who has given a super specialization will know. If you remember this, and the examiner asks you, you say, sir, I'm KRAS, BRAF, MEK, MAPK, and things will come over there. So BRAF is somewhere on the right side over here. And just remember this graph, and then I will get back to you why only BRAF inhibition is not enough. And BRAF inhibition is basically present in melanoma, 50 to 60% cases, 10% of colon cases, 2% of non-small cell lung cancer, 30 to 50% of thyroid cancer. So what happens is, if your BRAF gets mutated over here, then the MEK, MABK pathway basically gets stimulated, and which leads to invasion, metastasis, proliferation, and inhibition of angiogenesis. So any mutation in the BRAF without having anything to do with the KRAS gets activated, gets the downstream pathway activated, and leads to metastasis. That's the basic thing. Now let's talk about BRAF mutation in non-small cell lung cancer. BRAF mutation occurs in 2 to 4% of all non-small cell lung cancer adenocarcinomas. But here is where I will tell you some important points, that patients with BRAF mutations are more likely to be female. Happens all the time. Any oncogene has a more female preponderance. And also because the seminar is at 7 o'clock in the evening and the Wi-Fi is there just in the next room, anything has to be female preponderant over here. But very important is, anybody with a BRAF mutation has a high history of smoking too. So as Dr. Anubhav was telling in the lecture before, only 70% of the people do undergo testing, maybe because sometimes we feel that the guy is a smoker. He may not be able to, he may not have any oncogenes. But that's the point at which I want to tell you, that anybody with adenocarcinoma, irrespective of his age, smoking status, or any poorly differentiated, well differentiated, should definitely get an NGS testing or a EGFR, IL cross, and BRAF testing done now to look for any potential oncogene erection. Now, very important is, we spoke about BRAF. BRAF is present in 2 to 4% of patients. Contrast this with ROS. ROS is present in 1% of patients. And even the ALK, when it came initially, was present only in 4% of patients. Now it's the thing is 10%. Now, BRAF has got two kinds of mutation. One BRAF has got is a V600E mutation, and the second is a non-V600E mutation. And that's very, very, very important, which basically says you please, and as Dr. Anubha was telling it very rightly, you should actually have a look at the pathology report. You should talk to your molecular pathologist about what does the report actually show. So the BRAF V600E mutation is not the alone thing. And why is it important? And why should I even bother about, in EGFR, we don't bother about whether it's a 18, 19 or 21. We by and large give some medicines over there. The important thing over here is that first of all, BRAF V600E mutation people don't do as well as a non-V600E people. Also, BRAF mutant people don't do as well as the wild type people. So if I have to make a graph, it is the BRAF wild type people who do the best, then is the BRAF non-V600E, and then is the BRAF V600E people. As we can see by this graph, the red graph which shows the wild type, and the V600E is basically in the green or the gray graph. Even if you look at the non-V600E people, they do much better than what the V600E people do, and that is why there is an unmet need. So, come again, just summarizing again, BRAF V600E is present in 2 to 4% of people. There's a difference between V600E and non-V600E mutation. People with no BRAF mutation do the better one. Then comes the BRAF non-V600E, and then comes the BRAF V600E mutation. So definitely there's an unmet need to identify and treat the BRAF mutations. Now, let's look at the treatment options for BRAF mutant NSCLC and the current outcomes over here. So the story does not start with dabrafenib and trametinib. The story actually started with vemurafenib in BRAF mutant non-small cell lung cancer. And I would like to remind you of the basket trial in which the overall response rate was 42% and the progression-free survival with a single agent. So, please remember over here, vemurafenib is only BRAF inhibitor. That's very, very important to remember. We are not yet talking about a MEK inhibitor over there. So when you use a single agent vemurafenib, you have a response rate of 40% with a PFS of 7.3 months. Now, here is where I would like you to concentrate. If you have to listen to one slide in theory that you have to understand, here it is. Even if you block the BRAF mutation blocker, that is, if you have a TKI against the BRAF mutation, what happens is the MEK pathway becomes more active, and the responses to a typical only BRAF mutation is a very, very, very short-lived response. So that is why the PFS will be shorter. The overall response will be shorter because even if you block the BRAF, the MEK becomes active. Now, what happens in dabrafenib trametinib is the dabrafenib blocks the BRAF, trametinib also blocks the MEK1 and 2. So it's like 1 or 11. And that is why the response rate to dabrafenib and trametinib is much more better. It is not an additive combination. It is a synergistic combination because the trametinib helps to overcome the MEK or the ERK escape mechanism which is there. So now let's look at the data of dabrafenib and trametinib. So this was a study design, a complicated study design. I'll simplify it for you. So there were people who had got a BRAF mutant non-small cell lung cancer. They were divided into 3 cohorts. Now these 3 cohorts basically were retreated monotherapy. That is, people were exposed to chemotherapy. They were given only dabrafenib. So that's our control group, almost like a vemurafenib group. The cohort B was basically somebody who was pre-treated and you give dabrafenib and trametinib to it. The cohort C was basically treatment-naive combination. So cohort C is what we all want to be. Cohort B is something which we normally will have patients. Cohort A is something we think of past. I would say the pre-corona era was basically A. Cohort B is the present era. Cohort C is what I really want my patients to have when they walk into my clinic. They should have an NGS report. That is what probably will be cohort C. So the primary endpoint was an overall response rate, investigator assessed. The secondary endpoint was PFS and the duration of response and overall survival, etc. Now, the important thing over here notice, please note that 2/3 of the patients were current or former smokers. So a lot of time in our clinic, when Dr. Parekh will remember when the ISIL and all study came, it was saying, stuff like that. People with smokers never even got tested, but that is wrong. anybody with an adenocarcinoma, NOS, even if it's a current or a non-smoker, should definitely get tested for BRAF and all, because 2/3 of the BRAF mutant people were current or former smokers. Mostly all of them had adenocarcinoma, and cohort A had basically people who had taken second line and beyond. Now we all know by treating lung cancer, third line responses are very, very few. Similarly, again, the cohort was matched even in the cohort B. 3/4 of the patient were current or former smokers, and patient had received chemotherapy. That's very, very important. What I want to show you is that basically people with smoking have got a BRAF mutation. Now, remember what I spoke to you about vemurafenib, a response rate of 42% and a PFS of 7 months. Now here, a single agent dabrafenib retreated had a PFS of 5.5 months versus the overall response rate of 33%. So, okay, but nothing very impressive. It's a short-lived response. It's almost like a fling that you basically cause. But when it came to the cohort B and the cohort C, look at the waterfall curve over here. The overall response rate was 67%. In people who had got 2 lines of chemotherapy beyond, 67% response was fantastic, with a median PFS of 10.9 months. Even in the first line, the overall response rate was 65%, with a median progression-free survival was 6.2 months. Now, here is where this is where that actually fell short of expectations, because normally we would expect the drug to do better in the first line. But what we can take it from here is, to the BRAF testing, if the patient has got a BRAF mutation, it doesn't make a difference whether you're given the first line or second line. You will get a response rate of approximately around 65%, the median PFS of around 10.2 months. So again, if we look over here, whatever said and done, whether it is cohort B or cohort C, it is better than cohort A, which is the monotherapy. The response rates are double. The duration of response also was much better in the combination arm. So definitely, I can say ek aur ek 11, and definitely combination of dabrafenib trametinib is better. Now, what happens to the non-V600E cohort? A lot of times you will get an NGS done which will show a non-V600E. If you can see over here, this drug does not respond to V600E mutation, non-V600E mutation. That is something which you have to see very, very properly. Now, what about immunotherapy? Immunotherapy definitely has some amount of role. So even if your patient fails dabrafenib and trametinib, the response rate was around 24%, which is what we normally see in an unselected patient. So maybe immunotherapy could also be considered in smokers. But my gut feeling and my level of thinking is that anybody with an oncogene-related lung cancer should be given a TKIs first and then be given immunotherapy. Now, what about the safety data? Everything comes at a cost. There are no free lunches. The drug is toxic. Approximately 50% of the patient had a grade 3, grade 4 AE. However, there was a low discontinuation rate due to AEs. And again, very, very important thing is, not every DKI is a imatinib or a gefitinib. Not everybody will cause a peripheral edema and rash or diarrhea. We need to know the specific side effects of all these drugs so that we can counsel our patients better. Now, in case of dabrafenib trametinib, pyrexia was the most common AE. However, only 2% of the patient had grade 3 pyrexia. Other beings, anemia and maybe decreased appetite, hemoptysis, hypercalcemia. But my suggestion to everybody is, before we give drugs like this, we should definitely read up in detail about the side effects of all these drugs so that we are giving the right information to the patient. So let's say somebody gets dabrafenib and let's say somebody gets fever on that. Now there's a way to manage the fever in if somebody gets a fever on dabrafenib trametinib. Initially, it's a dabrafenib arm which causes the fever. So you interrupt the treatment with dabrafenib if the patient temperature is more. You continue trametinib at the same dose. In level step 2, you initiate antibiotics such as ibuprofen or paracetamol. Third, you consider steroids. Now that is not the way we normally manage fever with chemotherapy. So very, very important. First event, if it is there, you administer antibiotic treatment, you interrupt dabrafenib. If the fever was associated with dehydration, hypotension, then you decrease the dose of dabrafenib. If it doesn't work, start steroids. Subsequent events, then you decrease the dose of dabrafenib and trametinib. Again, you have to remember over here, the starting dose is 150 mg BD, but the first dose reduction can be 100 mg, second can be 75, third can be 50. Now, this is something which is very, very different and very, very specific for dabrafenib and trametinib. and as oncologists, we should definitely be aware of what drug we are giving to the patient. So I have given dabrafenib, trametinib to I think 3 or 4 patients. This was a patient, the doctor's mother. This is what she came to us with. This was the baseline. This is in after 2 months, and this is after 6 months of the survival. Now this lady is getting dabrafenib, trametinib free. A doctor's mother. Nothing can be more happy to me than seeing both the patient and the attendant when they come. Somebody who came with a scan like this, and is a scan like, and today is on 10 months on dabrafenib, trametinib. That's a fantastic response of treatment, and that is what I really feel personalized medicine, which will hopefully further improve survival in BRAF mutant non-small cell lung cancer. So where are we in 2019, 2020? You can either give dabrafenib plus trametinib initially, then you can give IO plus chemo, or you can give IO plus chemo and then give dabrafenib, trametinib. Basically, both of them work. My answer to this would be give dabrafenib, trametinib first, because it's a TKI, oncogene directed non-small cell lung cancer, needs to be treated with an TKI first. With this, thank you, and I hand it back to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we'll move on to our panel discussion. Our moderator is Dr. Jatin Sarin, medical oncologist from Chandigarh. His panelists are Dr. Neeraj Rastogi, radiation oncologist from Lucknow, Dr. Shiv Rajan, surgical oncologist from Lucknow, Dr. Sharad Singh, radiation oncologist from Lucknow, and Dr. Rajiv Saini, medical oncologist from Srinagar. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kashish. Thank you, Pravina Creations and Dr. Parikh sir for giving me this opportunity. This was a wonderful practical information that he gave about the usage of BRAF inhibitors in lung cancer. So we'll just consolidate what we have learned with this panel discussion. I welcome all the list, and I would request them all to be really brief. So next slide. Next slide. So this is a case of a 61-year-old female who has never smoked. And at presentation, she had stage 4 adenocarcinoma by virtue of pleural effusion, liver metastasis, and she underwent biopsy and routine testing for biomarkers, which most of us are really doing in the form of ELF, EGFR, and ROS. So next slide. So the question to the panelists first is, what will be the way to treat this patient in the current scenario? Anybody can take a shot, please. So how will we treat this patient? 64-year-old female, non-smoker, adenocarcinoma, biomarkers negative. Anybody? Dr. Sani? Can you hear me? Hello?
Hello. So we can hear you,
Hello.
sir.
Hello.
Hello? Yeah, Dr. Sani?
So in this patient, what is the PD-L1 status?
Okay, so you'll do a PD-L1 test. Let's say less than 1%.
Patient's financial status also.
Okay, so the patient can afford anything.
Okay, and what about PD-L1 status?
PD-L1 less than 1%.
Okay, in that case, we'll start with the chemotherapy.
Okay.
PAM carbohydrate based.
PAM carbohydrate. So looking at the clinical characteristic, do you think that this patient would be, if you have listened to the lecture of Dr. Batra, are those this particular case is harbinger of the BRAF mutation? Is there a possibility, or it's a possibility of harbinger of a different kind of biomarker?
She can have a
Anybody?
mutation also.
She can have BRAF mutation also. Okay. Yeah. Next slide, please. She was given cisplatin pemetrexed. She didn't respond really well. Treatment was changed to docetaxel. She didn't respond, and then it was changed to gemcitabine. So now, next slide. Next slide, please. So, what will be our next step? Anybody? Anybody among the panelists can take a shot, please. What will be our next step among these three? Dr. Neeraj?
I think we can start the immunotherapy because we first we should do the PDL1 as well as second we can do the BRAF mutation because the rest of the mutation were negative. So based on these mutations, we should personalize the treatment for this patient.
Yeah. No, I want to ask you whether you will go for some testing or you will start off with immunotherapy straight away.
I think you should go for the testing first and before starting the immunotherapy.
Right.
Next generation
And,
sequence.
okay. So, Dr. Sharad, which test will you go for? You will go for a mutation testing by next generation sequencing, or you will conduct a single gene test for BRAF?
Prefer next generation sequence.
Okay. Suppose there are logistics to say that you cannot send NGS and patient is not that affordable. Would you go for a single gene test for BRAF?
That will be a logical option.
That will be a logical option. Perfect. Because we have a drug for this biomarker, so why not test for a BRAF? Next slide, please. So this patient underwent a liquid biopsy for NGS, and in that BRAF V600E mutation was detected. So, anybody would start treatment of BRAF inhibitors on this, or would like to further check it for through tissue sample, or they will believe what liquid biopsy is saying? From the panelists, everybody, whether the liquid biopsy is enough for them, or you would check for BRAF test on a tissue block?
I think liquid biopsy is good enough to start the treatment.
Other treatments. So in the retrospect, you can see that this lady has progressed rapidly. She's a rapid progressor. She has failed 3 lines of chemotherapy and has a clinical characteristic which is of BRAF mutated lung cancer. And so she should be started. Already we have given 3 lines of treatment. She should be started on BRAF inhibitors. Next slide, please. I think we all agree on this, and Dr. Ulhas very elegantly showed that BRAF mutation positive NSCLC have poorer prognosis. The very first slide, he showed what further improving the survival of BRAF positive, because in both in first line as well as second line, the PFS of BRAF mutated lung cancer, non-small cell lung cancer, is very poor. Rather, it is just 2.8 to 3 months in second line. Next slide. So the same thing is shown out here. So very low overall response rate and very low PFS with chemotherapy. And in fact, this is though not true of melanoma, BRAF mutant. I don't know what is the experience of the panelists. What would you think? Suppose this was she was having a PDL1 of around 40% or say 70%. Would you have used immunotherapy in this patient? Any of the panelists, please can take it.
I think if PDL1 is 40%, definitely one has to start the immunotherapy, either the nivolumab or pembrolizumab.
Right. Okay. Ulhas, are you there? Dr. Ulhas, are you there?
I am there, Dr. Jatin. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Can you give your expert comment? You're treating 2 or 3 patients on BRAF inhibitors. So, what has been your experience of using immunotherapy in these patients in first line specifically?
So this patient that I had shown had a PDL1 of 90%, and the family was after my life to start immunotherapy. So generally, since she was a non-smoker and everything, I did an NGS prior to starting immunotherapy. So okay. To me, and I said, although I showed you data of immunotherapy, but the data is more of immunotherapy plus chemotherapy. If you look at my last slide also, that was IO plus chemo. Right. That was not only IO. So if you are probably giving the Canon 42 combination, IO plus chemo, I am okay. Only immunotherapy in a non-smoker female, I would rather get an NGS done prior to starting on that. That's my personal opinion, and that's what is really coming out actually.
Thank you very much. This was a very important insight, specifically for a non-small cell lung cancer who turn out to be BRAF mutant on NGS. Immunotherapy, in fact, people have said IO plus chemotherapy can be given, but there has been my personal experience but it is very small, that IO plus chemotherapy or IO in first line doesn't work in BRAF mutant NLP. It is a different story altogether in case of melanoma. So there is a difference, though this biomarker has a different biology. It's very strange. So next slide, please. So now what would be our choice of therapy? BRAF inhibitor alone, BRAF plus MEK inhibitor combination, immunotherapy, palliative care, or re-challenge with chemotherapy. I think most of our panelists will agree on this. Anybody can take it, please.
I think number 2 will be
number 2. BRAF plus MEK.
So everybody will be unanimous in their treatment-wise. BRAF plus MEK inhibitor combination. Though she has been given 3 lines of therapy, but still there is a thing for starting BRAF inhibitor, and it should be a combination. BRAF inhibitor alone is not sufficient. Next slide, please. This study was shown in good amount of detail by Dr. Ulhas, that in cohort A, single agent was used. In cohort B, after 1 to 3 prior lines of therapy, a double agent was used. And in cohort C, it is the first line. And he very aptly said that this represents large or means fast present and future of usage of BRAF inhibitor. Next slide. Next slide, please. This cartoon was shown by Dr. Ullas that RAF, MEK pathway, we have all been taught in our DM course, and we all know the signal transduction it is a kind of holy grail of many. It has been shown that BRAF V600E mutation constitutively activates BRAF and subsequent pathway, and sometimes MEK becomes when BRAF you somehow inhibit BRAF, then MEK becomes constitutively activated, and that is inhibited by MEK inhibitor, that is trametinib. Next slide, please. So best confirmed response as shown in more than time. This was investigator assessment. CR plus PR plus ST around 62%, or independent assessment is shown as 62%. Next slide, please. This is the waterfall graph showing the same. Next slide. Next slide. And these are the 1 year and 2 year overall survivals when we use dabrafenib and trametinib in more than equal to second line of therapy. Next slide. Next slide. So our patient was started on dabrafenib and trametinib. She received trametinib and she had a wonderful response and achieved 54% reduction on week 6. She tolerated the therapy pretty well, though they are not an easy agents to tolerate. Any of the panelists who have used BRAF inhibitors in their practice, what is the commonest side effect they have seen with the usage of BRAF inhibitor? Anybody can take it who have used BRAF inhibitors in the practice.
So, Dr. Jatin, I'll tell you fever and fatigue.
Dr. Neeraj?
I think pyrexia is the commonest side effect.
Yeah. Pyrexia is the most disturbing and commonest side effect. But what we have seen is that first 2 months of initiating this therapy is torrential. I mean, then gradually, with the dose reductions or dose adjustment and supportive therapy, the patients gradually tends to tolerate these therapies, these TKIs very well for a long term. What is your opinion, Dr. Ullas?
Yeah, absolutely right. The first 1-2 months is an issue. For me, fever and fatigue was very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, you get fever with chills, and you have to measure everything and to rule out all the cultures and all you have to do to rule out infection, because sometimes patient lands up like as if he or she is in a sepsis. But it is all because of the drug, and you just give a break or reduce the dose and give supportive treatment, and sometimes use steroids, and the patient settles down gradually. And along with fatigue, there is a good amount of anorexia also I have seen along with BRAF inhibitors. And there have been minor changes in transaminases. There is minor elevation in transaminases. Just great. So she tolerated this drug pretty well. Next slide, please. So, as said, pyrexia. The other important side effect, secondary skin malignancy is rare, but there are very specific skin reactions with BRAF inhibitors in the form of maculopapular rashes, and also sometimes nodules are formed. Very characteristic nodules are formed with BRAF inhibitors, but they are all benign papilloma kind of things. Nausea, vomiting is experienced by some patients, again, along with fever, or anorexia. So these are the rates of various grades of side effects, and one, as rightly said, is pyrexia. So when you see patients on, or when you plan to switch on BRAF inhibitors, you must tell them that there are high chances of getting a fever, but they shouldn't worry about the fever. It is a manageable because patient tends to stop the treatment when is there a case for upfront BRAF mutation testing? All the panelists, please. Anybody who has not
I think there is no rationale of upfront
contributed.
testing in BRAF because the mutation is only 2 to 4%.
2%.
Well, you're testing ROS, which is just 1 or 2%. Your test ROS just is just 1% rather. So why not BRAF? Because as shown by Dr. Ulhar, that particular case, she was PD-L1 90%, a very good case to start up on immunotherapy. But still, he sent NGS. So she was given upfront BRAF inhibitor. Why not give the best therapy if you can give upfront? Though the second line and first line use, it doesn't have much of a difference, but I think if there is a treatment available and the patient can afford it, one can go for an NGS testing upfront, which can detect BRAF mutation simultaneously along with all mutation. Just one question: who all are sending their lung cancer biopsy specimens upfront for NGS testing? Among the panelists, who all are sending NGS testing upfront in lung cancer before starting treatment? Yeah. Please, I just want yes or no from all the panelists. Just want to know who all are testing lung cancer NGS upfront.
I am not testing.
Okay, one of the panelists is not testing. What about the other panelists?
No.
Not testing. Okay. Is it because of logistic or economical reasons, or is there any scientific reason for that?
Logistical and economic. Yes.
Logistic, yeah.
So if those things are fine, would you go for upfront testing right at day one of diagnosis of lung cancer before starting any treatment?
Yes. I think.
If the logistics, yeah, most of us, will we do it?
Logically.
Yes, the panelists?
Yes.
Yes. So I think there is a scientific rationale for testing lung cancer. I think NGS is a very, very effective thing to do in at least lung cancer, where you can find out these rare mutations also, for which we are having therapies daily. There are therapies coming out. Recently, you might have known that there is a targeted therapy for KRAS also coming up. So the consensus is that BRAF mutation is another important driver mutation for non-small cell lung cancer, and if possible, it should be tested upfront, and patients should be offered therapy by after proper counseling in the form of, what kind of side effects he or she can have with the treatment, and patient needs a lot of reassurance regarding that, because it's a very, very effective TKI, as shown by the case out here also, and what Ulhas also shown. We all have very limited experience, but whatever experience we have, it's seen that BRAF V600E mutation, this combi TKI is very good and very effective in improving the progression-free and overall survival in such a lung cancer. Next slide. So the same is with the first line responses. Next slide, please. Next line. Next slide. So again, to stress the same point, this has also been shown by Dr. Ulhas. I don't want to repeat it. Next slide. Next slide. So these are the recommendations. We test all these mutations upfront. Next slide. And this is what is for BRAF V600E mutation. They should specifically write BRAF V600E mutation, because that is the thing which is responding to combi TKI. So whenever there is a progression or disease progression on a platinum-based or maybe platinum IO combination, you can test for BRAF and give this combination. If you are on BRAF inhibitor therapy and there is an progression in the form of a single new lesion somewhere, that can be taken care of by local treatment, and that is radiotherapy. And the BRAF inhibitors should not be stopped, they should be continued. You still get a good amount of disease control. So that is a very important point. Oligoprogression on BRAF inhibitors should be managed by local treatment. You tend to have a good amount of disease control along with combination. Like, when EGFR inhibitors came in the beginning, whenever they used to oligoprogression, then you are told not to stop EGFR inhibitors. You should continue with the EGFR inhibitors, and it's only when there is a progression which mandates urgent treatment or immediate response, then only you tend to switch to chemotherapy. This was what came initially. Now we are looking for subsequent mutations and giving or changing therapy accordingly. But this was the teaching before, that whenever there is oligoprogression, please continue. And of course, in EGFR also, you can treat oligoprogression with local treatment. Next slide. Next slide, please. NCCN guidelines also says the same thing. Next slide, please. So, in summary, it is a rare disease, just 2% of cases, NSCLC, not as high as in melanoma. A toxic indicator for lower response and progression-free and overall survival. There has been no specific clinical selection, though it has been shown sometimes that even heavy smokers can have this kind of a mutation. And BRAF, it's a valid point to test BRAF along with the other mutation upfront in a newly diagnosed non-small cell lung cancer. Thank you, and I hand over to organizers.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you to the